Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's glad to have recognition from the gentleman from Tennessee. Thank you for your patience being here, IGs. We're grateful for your participation because, as you've heard from every member on both sides of the aisle, while there is tremendous, strong bipartisan support for the humanitarian, governmental, lending, and military support for Ukraine, there's also tremendous anxiety and interest from our constituents, not only here in the United States, but also in Europe, for European countries, that is a full accounting made for all of that support. So thank you for the work you're doing on the front lines of that. In December, after the House was briefed by Secretary Blinken and Deputy Secretary Adeyemo on funding for Ukraine, I made two principal points to them and followed up with a letter. Congress has to date not really had the full financial overview of our support in each of the buckets that you've referred to, so direct governmental support, humanitarian support, both at the United Nations and through USAID, and military, in a way that they can compare it to other countries. Because part of building consensus in Congress is to demonstrate that while we may have been upfront a major contributor here and the dominant military contributor, that we want to see the world come behind us and play an important increasing role. And we saw that just in the week, President's Day week, when Prime Minister Kishida in Japan pledged $5.5 billion towards Ukraine support, and that's what we want to see more of. And so this work is very valuable, and I'm grateful to you. Ms. Agranella, I want to ask you a question about USAID. So you have, you give money to the UN and you give money to contractees with USAID, which are trusted NGO groups that you regularly do business with. But you were, the agency was pressed to give money directly to NGO groups preferred by Ukraine, for example. Is your auditing different in the how one looks at the trail of money going into a UN agency versus a longtime USAID contractor versus a Ukrainian NGO?
With respect, thank you for the question. With respect to the NGOs, whether they're large NGOs that we've worked with for years in the past, or we being USAID in terms of providing oversight, not we as in the agency, versus a smaller local NGO or a new partner, we do our work the same exact way. It's a little bit different with UN organizations and the access that we have. It goes as far as what USAID's access is agreed to in the ADS for access to UN documents. With respect to what USAID calls implementing partners, the NGOs, right now in Ukraine, because of the work, it's major NGOs that I mentioned that USAID has partnered with in the past. And then there are sub-awardees that the large implementing partners will conduct, will give sub-awards. And our oversight extends to all of those agencies.
Good. That's helpful.
Yes.
You each have investigative arms of your bodies, and so to what extent are they responding to allegations of waste, fraud, and abuse? Maybe each of you could just respond to that. And are they, what does their response look like to you? Are they on the ground? Are they doing it by email? How are they operating?
So DCIS, which is part of the DoD Inspector General's office, has people all over the world, including people in Europe, posted forward, and we respond to all allegations of waste, fraud, abuse.
And have you seen that called for and therefore deployed a team into Ukraine or into Poland or another port of entry of material moving into Ukraine?
Right. So we've gotten a variety of allegations, frankly, without getting into specifics, typical of the type of allegations one gets in these sort of conflict situations. And on at least one occasion, I'm aware of, our folks have reached out into Ukraine to get information. We haven't had to deploy anyone there, but if we need to, we will.
Let me turn to our two other State Departments.
Sure. We have received 178 complaints related to Ukraine, which is, I mentioned, a 556% increase, which to me indicates our outreach is working and people know who to come to report things from the ground in Ukraine. We don't have any permanent staff in Kyiv right now. We have Foreign Service agents deployed in closer to it in Europe, in Frankfurt. But this week, we just had 2 criminal agents do TDYs for 3 days in Ukraine, one taking further investigative steps on an open investigation, and others just doing sort of this relationship building that we were talking about.
Good. I'll leave it there, but if you could respond in writing, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.